Hello, everybody, and welcome. The topic of the discussion that we have for the next hour or so is all around precision go-to-market and how you can engineer growth with AI. My name is Matthew Volm, CEO and founder of RevOps Co-op, a global community of 17,000 plus revenue operators from all across the globe. We put on a whole slew of digital events like this, in-person events. We have courses, a revenue operations certification. We have a bunch of different membership types. So I'll drop some links into the chat for you all after we get started. If you're not a member of the community, would obviously love to have you join. But with me, I have Jose Romero, who is a VP of product, VP of platform over at xfactor.io. And Jose, I'm going to actually let you tell us more about yourself and Xfactor, but I want to ask you, I guess maybe surprise you with one kind of question that's not work related or RevOps related to kind of add in there. So we're actually just talking about, I guess, the heat. We're kind of sitting here in the last day. I think today is the last day of July. Tomorrow's August, which that got me thinking about how I can't believe it's August. That's like kind of the last month of summer. And then it's like September rolls around, kids start school again, and then, like football season kicks off and it's like fall. And so my question for you that I would love to have you answer along with telling us more about yourself professionally is what has been the highlight of Jose's 2025 summer, whether it's something that's already happened in the months of June or July, or it's something that you have planned in August. Tell me the highlight, the best thing you've got going on for summer 2025.
That's an awesome question. Big in family. So I spent a week with friends and family down in South Florida a few weeks back. So I was able to just unplug and try to just work on what matters, right? Focus on what matters. And folks getting older, so it's important to spend time with them and see cousins and nephews and all of that. So that was my highlight. I think it'll be hard to beat. I look forward to those moments. So yeah, I run product management at Xfactor. The uniqueness about what I do and the company I work for is I started my career as a software developer. I was doing coding many years ago. But then after earning my MBA, I decided to try to use it. So I actually was a salesperson for a while. I was also a sales engineer for a while. I carried a bag as a salesperson. That was very enlightening. After being in that role, I learned about product management. I've been doing product management for a couple of decades now. This opportunity at Xfactor and building this product at Xfactor has been a dream come true because it combines everything that I've been doing in my career in one place. So we're basically building a platform that helps measure whether your plans will come into fruition in a very data-driven way, right? So you as a RevOps person, you're trying to figure out what are the right things to do in order to meet or exceed your goals. We'll go into that here in this presentation about this concept of RevOps levers, right? So there's all these metrics that you have at your disposal, and then you're always looking at them and trying to figure out something happened, what do I do, right? So we can get into it, but it was super exciting to join and be a part of the initial team that started Xfactor and address this problem that the RevOps community has.
Yeah. I'm just going to say right now, you might be the only person or the first person that I've ever heard say going to South Florida in July was the highlight of their summer. That seems a little backwards, but the family time, like double thumbs up.
I'll leave you with something. I was born and raised in Puerto Rico, so South Florida weather is actually cooler
There you go.
than I was growing up. So
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, why don't you kind of go ahead and get us rolling on some of the content, some of the things you're going to share with us today.
absolutely. So, let's start up understanding some of the problems, right? So there's a Gartner report that came out earlier this year that states that a CRO spends 87% of their time firefighting. So this is senior executive reporting to the CEO that spends the majority of their time doing firefighting. So that seems wrong, right? There's something not quite right with that. So focusing on short-term initiatives versus long-term seems like a fool's errand and you never get out of it. As a friend of mine says, you're playing whack-a-mole. So the dilemma that a RevOps team has is that they are really dealing with what I call a three-legged stool, right? So you have sales ops, marketing ops, and customer success ops. RevOps is in charge of all of that, right? So there's this challenge where these are separate functions in an interconnected system. So you typically focus on optimizing one leg of this stool, and that makes the other legs destabilize. This creates all sorts of bottlenecks and wasted resources. This is mainly because data is disconnected and siloed. So the marketing team keeps a source of truth, the sales team keeps a source of truth, CS team, and they don't talk to each other. And then there's effects that happen when you move one thing that may impact the other, and that lack of interconnectedness causes issues. So what do I mean by, in the presentation at the top, I was talking about RevOps levers. What do I mean by those? Right? So what are these? So you're all familiar with them. There's all types of levers available to you. So things like marketing levers for top of funnel qualification, there's sales levers for conversion and velocity, there's CS levers for retention, expansion, value realized, and there's even financial levers, right? That your finance team is going to look at. But the problem with these is that, again, they're interconnected. So how do you handle that? So let me talk a little bit about what I mean by that, right? So let's go to a more concrete example. So you have your sales team, they do a heroic job of shortening your sales cycle, right? And everybody's like, that's a win, awesome. But now the marketing lead velocity, you didn't talk to marketing about making that improvement, that optimization. So the lead velocity doesn't change. So now you have all these high-performing reps idle, waiting for leads because you basically created a bottleneck. It's a go-to-market system. So the system is as fast as the slowest piece. Just like this one, there's a ton of other interconnected dependencies in the system. I wanted to ask a question, and we'll have it on the poll. When you're thinking about go-to-market planning, what is your biggest growth gap challenge? You have some options in there between siloed teams and disconnected data, fragile spreadsheets, unpredictable bottlenecks, and all of the above.
Yeah. I know we'll give people a little bit of time to fill this out. I guess a couple of questions for you, Jose. I think it was back on that second slide, you showed kind of the work week by percent of time allocated. And I know I've seen someone kind of communicated this in a similar way where they were talking about the idea of like $5 jobs, how so much of people's time is spent on these kind of $5 jobs, which is basically like the firefighting stuff you mentioned. And that doesn't allow you to focus on enough time on the $5,000 jobs, which is really where you want to be able to spend most of your time. And I think, yeah, the thing, as you were talking through the bottleneck piece, that you assume that you're going to ultimately drive better outcomes. You don't tend to think about creating issues in other areas, right? So like that example said, you shorten the sales cycle by 30%. That's great. We're closing deals faster, but no consideration for then the pipeline you need to be able to produce more deals as closed won after that, right? And so now you've got a new problem that's ultimately been created. So I'm going to end, let's see, I'm going to end the poll. And before I share the results, Jose, what do you think? I mean, you've seen this a lot. You've seen this at your customers. You've seen this yourself. You mentioned in a variety of different roles. What would your answer to this one
So
be?
yeah, I think it's all of the above, to be honest, but be interested to see if there's a specific pain point for the audience.
Yeah. So I mean, all of the above, which I don't know if we gave people like a cop out answer with all of the above, but otherwise it looks like siloed team disconnected data is big. I'm actually surprised no one selected the fragile spreadsheets because it seems like, especially I know I've experienced this with planning, right? Like after you build out your plan and your spreadsheet, you kind of reach this point that you cross where you're like, okay, like, any other thing, like I can't do that thing because that'll break this thing over here. And if I add this, then I got to make sure to do that. And then it all becomes this thing in your head where you can't let anybody else touch your plan or your model because literally just putting something in the wrong place could crash the whole thing.
Yeah, and Arvin put an interesting comment in there. In some cases, all of the above includes fragile spreadsheets.
Yeah.
So I'll move on then. I use the term growth guess gap, right? And I wanted to go a little bit deeper into what I mean by that. It seems like it's an obvious topic or term, right? But I've seen this problem firsthand. So this whole system level chaos that we have creates a chasm, right? As you have in this picture, where we we have a chasm between what we are telling our board and what our actual performance is, right? We tried our best to meet the number that the board wants, but because of things that sometimes we cannot control, it causes a gap. So, and here's the fragile spreadsheet comment, right? Fits a piece of this, right? There's the siloed data, but there's also the modeling. So I want to change the pace of the conversation a bit and ask a question to the audience. So interesting question for everybody to think about. What do you think was the biggest technological innovation in 1985?
Oh man. I was born in 1986. So I don't even know how to.
So Matt, this one is going to shock you
Yeah.
because it's so telling as to what the problem is. The answer is quite simply Excel. So the tool that RevOps utilizes is older than you are.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess the primary, I mean, certainly it's been updated, right? But the primary piece of software that runs so many things at so many businesses today in what, 2025 is, am I doing the math correctly? 40 years? 40 years old?
Yep.
That's wild. That is wild.
So is there a solution to this problem is the question that I have, right? And I think if I was going to get one thing out of this whole webinar is to have people move out of using Excel. Arvin says that he posted an Excel commercial. I'll watch that after we're done over here. That'll be hilarious. You probably all heard about the concept of vibe coding, right? So now pivoting to development, not to RevOps, but I'll make the connection in a moment. This concept of vibe coding, all, if not all, most, if not all, the developers at X Factor leverage vibe coding. The newer term for the same thing is context engineering. But in essence, the developers are not writing code anymore, right? It's time consuming to write all these lines of code. So they're offloading the repetitive tasks of coding to the machine, and that frees them to do more complex thinking, solve more complex problems, right? It has all other benefits as well, where the quality of the output is checked, right? So you as you're writing the code, you can ask it to QA the results, right? And so now you have almost built-in QA, and it makes it easy for people to get into it because you don't have to be a very sophisticated, you don't have to know a lot of different languages to be able to support this. So the question is, what is the software, if software development has moved into vibe coding, is there an equivalent to RevOps is the question that I'm asking. And so it's just a thought exercise, but I think there is. So I do want everybody to have an open mind about this because I think there are ways to get from, 1985 technology,
Yeah.
yes, I like that one, to something more modern, like not 40-year-old technology. So the good news is I think that there's a way for you to start closing this gap that I talked about. If you use a foundational model, and in this example, I've put together a PDF with a set of prompts, and I've used Claude Desktop with a Salesforce MCP server to connect them so that now I can talk to Claude and it has access to a Salesforce instance. So you can now do more sophisticated work. These 5 prompts go deep into specific areas, as you can see here. On the left, you have future pipeline health forecast, lead conversion bottleneck identification, stalled opportunity risk assessment, quarterly pipeline gap analysis, and suboptimal opportunity engagement assessment. So those are the prompts, right? You can do those on a spreadsheet, but there's going to be a lot of limitations. These prompts are very practical, immediate things that you can start using today. And if you share your information with us, we'll share those prompts for you so you can start getting value out of these things. But let's look at the first one. I'm going to just crack into the first one and show you what I mean, right? So this is the whole prompt that I created, right? So I've asked it to, and I'm using the field names for the instance, the test instance that I was leveraging. So if you have a different set of fields in your CRM, you would need to modify these, right? But what I'm doing here is I'm telling it, okay, look in the last 12 months for close won opportunities. exclude the top and bottom outliers. So if any whales and minnows, just remove those from the equation. And then help me analyze historical trends on cycle length and stage progression. And then ask it to predict how many opportunities will be created between today and the end of the fiscal year that will help us meet our target, right? So this is fairly sophisticated. You're doing regression analysis, you're looking at all the data, then you're doing regression analysis while removing outliers. And then I'm asking it to tell me what the gap is going to be, right? And give me some information on that. So when I ran that against I think an $8 million plan, just for sake of the demo data that I had, this is what I got. This is the response that I got, right? So I did a deep analysis of the Salesforce information. First started telling me about the historical performance of the opportunities, calculated average sales cycle, average deal size, all of the basic lagging indicators of my business. Then it started identifying how many reverse funnel analysis for me and identified how many opportunities I need in order to hit my number. And it went into specific details of each thing. And at the very end, it provided a set of recommendations. It said, you probably need to, double down on lead generation and opportunity creation, focusing on shorter opportunities with short sales cycle, etc. And this is just the first part because you could ask it to give you more details on each recommendation. So to keep it brief, this is kind of like the first step. From here, you can ask more detailed questions and it still has access to your data. So it can dive really deep and give you some deeper insights into your own information. This is great from the perspective of now you have a deep understanding of your own information. Doing this on a spreadsheet is going to take you at least a few hours. And this took.
Jeez, yeah. I was because as you were like showing the prompt, I was like kind of had in my head like when I've tried to do stuff like this before is like, oh yeah, how would I do that? It's like, okay, if I, download the data, put it into a spreadsheet, run these sort of formulas, like okay, like create these sort of charts. And I was like, yeah, no, that's taking me more than a couple hours. That's taking me a while.
Yeah. So I said took a couple hours trying to be nice, right? Because it's
Yeah.
probably going to be longer than that.
Yeah.
Download the data. The moment you download the data, now the data is stale.
Yeah.
This running this prompt took less than 5 minutes to run, right? So the moment I press enter, it started processing, and less than 5 minutes later, I had this result. And this result comes out of the data at that moment in time. So if I run this again tomorrow, I don't have to download the data. It'll just run it against the existing version of the data. And the results may be different because my data changed, right? So from that perspective is great. I mean, it gives you a lot of insights. You can see the value of doing this versus spreadsheets is my point.
Yeah. I've asked we've talked about AI on a bunch of different kind of digital events that we've done lately that have been on a wide variety of topics. But one of the things that always comes up, and especially here, since we're talking about data, is just going to be accuracy, hallucinations, people probably wondering how to audit. And there's some things that are, I don't know, I guess, call it easier to like audit. For example, on this screen, right? 143 total opportunities. You can like, there's kind of some math, right, that you can easily do to look at like, okay, I'm gonna run this manually and see what the sales cycle is compared to what Claude gave me here. But then you think about some of the stuff around like what's forecasted. So how do you think about hallucinations, accuracy, taking data and stuff like this that's provided at face value? Like how should people think about doing QA on this sort of stuff?
The easiest way to do QA is to ask it for the formula that was used to come up with the answer, right? So you put on the same prompt you ask it for an appendix section with all the calculations, or you could do it as a following prompt. But the best practice in the market right now for doing this sort of thing is called multi-agency. And what I mean by that is having two agents, one that's doing the work and one is QAing. And the one that's QAing does not have access to how the one that was creating came up with the answers. So you can ask it, the QA agent, if you wish, to figure out whether the answers are correct. You could use two different LLMs, two different foundational models. So like, you can use one from OpenAI and one from Google or from Claude, and they're built differently. So you'll have better chances of finding issues. You can even, if you want to really go deeper, you could actually have two QA agents. I mean, it's not going to cost you any much more. And one can QA, the other can QA, see if the results are the same. And if they're the same, you can call that success.
Mm-hmm.
So these are more advanced things that you can do with LMs for that purpose. I would say first one is just ask it for the formulas that were used.
Yeah.
Walk me through the math step by step.
Yeah.
So I'll move on. This is a huge step away from spreadsheets, but there are some limitations. These prompts do not help with the silo problem. The systems aren't talking to each other. You have to still provide a lot of context. And to your point, validating some of the data is super important. More importantly, these models cannot calculate or take into consideration second order effects. For example, if you ask a question, what happens to my sales capacity if I take a specific marketing campaign and increase the ROI? Those two things are not talking to each other, and it does not know the correlation, causation of those things. So yes, a step forward. And yes, I highly encourage everybody to move into this. It's going to make you way more productive, but there's still some challenges with it. So I want to move into another survey question. How does your team primarily model complex GTM trade-offs? One example I have here is hiring 5 SDRs versus increasing marketing spend. How do you make that decision? Is it mostly gut feel and past experience? Is it manual spreadsheets, VLOOKUP tables and pivot tables, disconnected BI tool, CRM reports, or you don't have a reliable way of doing it today?
Yeah. So yeah, I've got this launch. We'll give people like 30, 45 seconds to answer here. I guess as I was reading this, Jose, one of the things I was thinking of was, the question is, how does your team primarily model? And I guess maybe we should have given people the option to answer, we don't model these things at all. Because I was thinking I've had some scar tissue from this too. It's like you kind of do whatever the CEO says he or she wants to do, right? They like the sales team better. Maybe it's go out and hire some people over there. Or maybe they have some baggage from some prior experience, right? Or, maybe they came from the marketing background, so they're going to want to invest more in marketing.
So that
Yeah.
sounds like gut feel, right? So
Before I share the results, same question to you, Jose. Where do you think majority of people landed?
I think there's a lot of spreadsheet users here, probably, or so either B or D, I think are going to be the answers.
You maybe have some experience in dealing with a variety of people in this, but yeah, that was kind of my guess too going in. I know something I've experienced. The manual spreadsheets is like a big way. Again, it's kind of that combined with, I don't know, I'll say like gut feel and past experience. And also, I think all of these are kind of could be D, right? Where it's like we don't have a reliable way to do this. Cause I know a lot of the modeling that I've done in my past has been all around, typically it's time driven, right? It's like, hey, we need to put together our annual plan or annual budget. And then, you kind of maybe sometimes go back and look at that when you're making decisions like the one we're talking about here, hiring SDRs versus investing more in marketing. But, a lot of times, again, we talked about the fragility of these spreadsheets, and it's like, well, that thing has been, kind of locked down since we finalized the budget, and I'm not really going to go back and try to mess around with it because who knows what'll break.
And if you leave the company, good luck to the next person who's coming
Oh,
in.
you gotta build. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, at that point, starting a new spreadsheet with your own complexities in your own head is going to be way faster than trying to understand someone else's.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. One thing that would be interesting, another topic that we could talk about in another day is moving to more real-time operations. Software development has moved to agile, and I think RevOps should do the same. I think putting together a plan and then hoping that months and months later it's going to actually be still valid, I think is a fool's errand.
Yeah.
Checking it often and being able to do macro adjustments is probably going to help you. But let's move on. So this is where I think, with all these complexities in modeling is where AI becomes your friend, right? Becomes your co-pilot. So, there are foundational LLMs, and for those who do not know what those mean, I mean, the off-the-shelf, you log in to Claude, you log in to Gemini, you log in to Chat GPT, right? Those are the foundational models, but they're generic models. They're trying to answer any question. What I'm talking about is more of a AI that is purpose built for revenue. So it's trained on specific dynamics for sales capacity, pipeline velocity, marketing campaigns, customer success. This is an emerging category called growth AI. It's designed to overcome some of the limitations of this generic AI by understanding the causal relationships in your go-to-market system. I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by causal in a moment. It'll make a lot of sense. So there's this concept of predictive AI. And the example I gave earlier does actual prediction, right? It looks at your data, does regression analysis, and try to do a prediction. And that is very powerful. Don't get me wrong. It's analyzing your historical data and forecasting what will likely happen. So it can give you more accurate sales forecasts and identify customer risk and churn and all these great things. But it has a critical limitation. It works on correlation. So you've probably heard the term, an example of bad correlation, that if because firemen are around fires, they then must be the reason for the fires, right? There's a correlation that firemen are around fires, but we all know that's not true. They are not the ones who caused the fire. But so just like that, the correlation is powerful, but it doesn't take in consideration the causal effects. So what do I mean by that, right? So this is where I think is the game changer for RevOps, right? So this goes deeper than cause and effect, right? It can answer questions of if I pull this lever, and we talked about all those levers earlier, what is the real true causal impact to the whole system? We talked about the whole pipeline situation where you reduce your sales cycle, right? And then now you have a bottleneck. So knowing that you need to, if you reduce your sales cycle, you also have to increase your capacity. Sorry, your lead generation capacity is critical. You may also need to hire more SDRs, right? Because now you've had more leads that you're generating, so you may have to also impact your SDR capacity. So we can model these complex trade-offs and see the probable outcomes before we commit a single dollar. So one more survey question for the group. If you could run a perfect what if scenario simulation, which go-to-market questions would you answer first? And I just provided some, probably there's others that you can think of, but you ask the top go-to-market what if question, explore true revenue impact for strategic choices, analyze changes in win rate and pipeline needs, or determine the real ROI of programs on bookings.
I like that question. And yeah, I feel like if anyone has something that comes to mind that maybe isn't represented on here, feel free to throw that into the chat. I'm looking at the answers now to see how I would answer. I think maybe it falls into the last one a little bit, but the main thing that always comes to my mind is any company that you're at, you know that you have gaps or inefficiencies somewhere. So my first question is always like, give me the highest priority gaps that would have the biggest impact on revenue, right? Like those are probably the things that I'd want to know. Is it new business related? Is it renewal retention related? Like to your point on levers, what's the lever I could pull? Again, trade off between effort and impact, and then kind of move up the equation from there. That's always where I think about wanting to start. But it's hard because you got to dive into all those different areas to actually figure it out, you know? Yeah.
Talked to a RevOps professional the other day. He was telling me that their CRO had asked them to simulate what would happen to my top line number if they reduced attrition by X%, ramp time by Y, and win rate by Z. And because they had a board meeting the next day. And
Yeah.
the guy said, well, that's going to take me more than a day to calculate. It's probably going to take me more than 5 days. It's probably going to take me 5 weeks to
Yeah.
with that answer. So, but I actually looking at the results. This is exactly what I was thinking. Is that if when you start pivoting from firefighting to making strategic bets, that to me is the way to go. So that exploring revenue impact for strategic choices, I would agree with that one.
Yeah. Cause again, like I mean, everything's about trade-offs, right? And, there's probably, unless you're open AI, you probably can't do everything that you want to be able to do and invest in everything you want to be able to invest in, right? But I'm assuming they probably have limitations too. But, like it's all about trade-offs, right? So yeah, it's understanding where you can have the most impact with the budget, the dollars, the resources you have to deploy.
I agree. Yes, Arvin, completely agree. I guess I'm biased because I'm a product manager, but I do think that, GTM is the product and RevOps is the product manager. Completely agree with that statement. And yes, the simulations help with prioritization. Completely agree with you, Mitch. And then Arvin, million percent agree that you need a robust model. The latest technology there are called DAGs. They're causal graphs that you need to generate. And those, to your point, need to be very strong. They need to be very robust. Not only that, you need to do something that's called do calculus. It's not your regular calculus, it's a causal calculus on these trade-offs in order to have a good answer. So not an easy thing to answer. I almost telling you about what we're doing on our side here.
Yeah. You're also like, I'm hearing all of that and I'm like, man, that sounds really, really complicated and way above my level of intelligence.
But here's the thing, right? I mean, the question is, what is the value RevOps provides, right? And is it doing a lot of math
Yeah.
or solving problems?
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
the answer is the latter. But so
100% agree, but you'd want them to focus more
well,
on problem solving.
and going back to the whole vibe coding or contextual context engineering, the developers doesn't mean that developers don't know how to code, right? That they are now less reliant on that. So they could still be really good at coding, but they hand that work off to the machine and then they can check the code, right? They can check that the code is correct. To your question earlier, Matt, is check the math. Like ask the chatbot to tell you what math it used. And then if you're good at it, you're going to be able to catch if there's any mistakes.
Yeah.
Looking at the time, I want to make sure that we get to the end. So really quickly, let's look at real world complex scenarios. So I mentioned a version of this earlier, right? So your CRO is worried about hitting an annual number and asks you to model the impact of 4 different improvements across the whole GTM engine. And doing this on a spreadsheet is very difficult, right? There's a lot of different interdependencies. But if you have a growth AI platform, you're not guessing anymore, you're simulating. And you're adjusting these levers, and the systems instantly models your compounding effects across the whole system. And that not only tells you the potential revenue lift, but also when you'll close the gap, like how long would it take you, right? So this is the difference between panic guessing to precise data-driven strategy. So what does this look like in the real world? This is a screenshot of the simulation engine that we have at X Factor, right? What if, in this example, what if you could increase your new business average sales price by 10%? What would that do to your number? It takes in consideration all these causal components. It helps you remove the guessing and does all the math for you so that you can then make some intelligent choices, right? So in this case, you've decided to say, I think I can increase my new business average sales price, but it could be that it's some other lever, right? So you're thinking maybe you have an attrition problem and maybe that is a priority, or maybe you have a ramp time problem and maybe that's the priority. So you still are in control trying to figure out what is it that you want to fix. The machine just does all the math for you. So you focus on the strategy and the machine does all the math.
How should people think about back testing? Like any of the simulations, forecasting things, whether it's just making sure that any products like X Factor, for example, do certain things with that or anything that they should be doing themselves.
What do you mean by backtesting?
So just thinking about like if we're talking about running simulations or forecasting is like kind of taking, forecasts or snapshots or simulations and actually saying like, okay, if this is the anticipated outcome of these things, how can I compare these then to kind of actual results? Should we just take for granted that these things are embedded within, call it the AI, or how should we
No,
think?
so it's actually part of that RevOps certification that you talked about earlier. Talks a lot about that, about taking snapshots in time. You make a hypothesis, right? So it's very scientific in nature. Make a hypothesis. You say, okay, I'm going to try this experiment out, and then you measure. But you don't measure 6 months later, right? You measure as soon as possible. So it could be that it's a month later and you see if the changes you've made are starting to move the lever in the right direction. So yes, in the graph that you're looking at here, you have a whole year, but you can pinpoint to a specific moment in time. You look at a month, right? And then say, what is the delta between month 1 and 2 if I make this change? And if you're seeing that it's moving in the right direction, that helps you validate that the simulation is working the way you expect it to.
Mhm.
Cool. So trying to get to the end here and open up for questions. We talked about multi-agency a moment ago, right? The whole concept of an autonomous GTM engine is taking it to the next level. So now you're not thinking about replacing RevOps, you're elevating it. Like talked about focusing RevOps on strategic work instead of manual, mundane analysis, right? So you're automating a lot of this. You're designing better playbooks, handling complex exceptions, tuning the whole engine. So you become the chief architect for the company's go-to-market revenue machine. So it doesn't eliminate your job, it actually elevates it. You now become something more. You can do a lot more than just work on going back to one of the first slides, the firefighting. Instead of focusing on the firefighting, now you're focusing on the strategic. In our friend Stephen, the colleague of mine, Stephanie Martin, presented this slide on a previous webinar where they're talking about those growth drivers and the impact. So this diagram, I love it because it helps you figure out where to focus, right? So on the x-axis, you have how easy is it to implement a specific strategy versus the return, right? So you can do things like simplifying your commercial stack. That is a high return, low is a very difficult thing to do, right? Because it is expensive. But as you go to both extremes, right? Redesigning the commercial architecture, it's something that is going to give you a very high return. And with the right tool, it can be very easy to understand what those levers are and implement. Also, understanding how to move people around. You're thinking about where your gaps and your territories are. Like, do you have the right people sitting in the right places to give you the best return? So again, you're going to hear the term agentic AI a lot, right? And these are systems that execute tasks for you. This agentic execution is only as good as the strategy it's executing. So in the diagram that we're looking at is that you have your tasks right in the bottom, the how, but growth AI sits at the very top. It's actually looking at everything that is happening in the system and trying to help you by doing all the simulation itself. So think about it this way. You could move these levers by hand, but what is the right combination of levers, right? So the system is trying to figure out, it knows what you're optimizing for, and it then can tell you, okay, think about maybe this combination. Maybe if you reduce attrition, increase on this marketing campaign and this other thing, you can get to your goal. But if you look at it and go, that doesn't make sense, then it can give you many other suggestions on all these different levers to get to your goal faster. And then I want to just to stop there and give the audience a few minutes for questions.
Yeah, so feel free, everyone, to throw any questions you have in the Q&A or the chat. I know well, first I want to give a shout out. You mentioned our partners as well, the folks at Revenue Operations Associates, Stephen Diorio. He wrote the book on revenue operations. That is what we based our revenue operations certification on. And so we do have, I dropped the link into the chat for anyone who wants a formal certification in revenue operations, just like you can go out and get certified to be a public accountant or a chartered financial analyst or a project management professional. We've got the ROC, so that link is available on the website. One question that I actually had for you, Jose, was, so we've talked here a lot about planning, growth AI, applying that to, simulations, helping to kind of answer some of these complex sort of questions. In some other events where we've talked about AI, have also had some common threads around best practices for leveraging call recordings and, kind of getting data into your CRM. So I want to ask you about any other AI use cases outside of those things that either you or the team at X Factor is leveraging AI for when it comes to revenue and revenue operations, or that you've seen any of your customers or other folks kind of leverage. What are some other unique AI use cases that operators can be thinking about as it applies to them?
Look, so to me, it goes back to what we were discussing is about strategic insights, right? So understanding strategic insights and having AI help you with that is, to me, a key piece. And we're actively working on that, where you may have a treasure trove of information, both call recordings, and the technical term for that type of data is unstructured data, right? And then your CRM can have a combination of both structured and unstructured data, right? So anytime you have a text field, that's unstructured because you can type whatever. But choosing the stage of an opportunity or the status of a lead, that's structured data. That's a predefined field with a specific value. Combining those two and getting insights from a combination of those two pieces of data to then drive not only a root cause analysis of a problem you're trying to solve, but also best practices from other companies, as well as understanding the impact of that root cause to your whole business. I think that those are critical things that RevOps people need to be looking at.
Yeah, I like that. I have a couple more, I'll call these like rapid fire sort of questions. I just want your initial reaction, your initial take. They're going to be AI related. Will AI SDRs be a thing? Yes or no?
Yes.
Will big, large incumbent software companies like the Salesforces, the Googles, will we see them, one of them, go belly up, go out of business because of this AI shift that's happening?
I think the answer is yes. I think it'll surprise you. Anybody in the audience who is looking at AI and going, man, I need to catch up with this stuff because it's just moving so quickly. Everybody's thinking that way. So yes, the answer I think is absolutely yes. One of them, if not more than one of them, will go belly up.
All
But
right.
let's comment on that.
Yeah.
I was happily surprised to see that Google is basically cannibalizing on itself because of how they approached AI. That was a conflict of technology versus business, and they've realized, okay, I need to cannibalize on my own business, otherwise I'm not going to exist anymore.
Yeah. All right. Is every company going to become a software company and start building their own applications and things themselves because of the power of AI? Or are software companies going to continue to exist?
I think software companies are going to continue to exist, not because I work for a software company, but because, yes, you could do vibe coding and you could create some prototyping of your own, but then it implies, right, that if you're going to have a robust system that is scalable, the you don't even know how to ask that question to the machine, right?
Yeah.
How do you even start to ask that question, how to build a robust, scalable system? So I think you're still going to need that discipline. Now, it may mean that, and companies already do this, hire software developers to do that work for them. They may not need as many, but I think you're going to have a hybrid. You're going to have, software companies are still going to be around, but you're going to have others that just get smart around AI and get between a software company and what they do to get better and optimize their systems and go faster.
Yeah. I agree. I think, again, companies out there, right? One, you don't know what you don't know. Two, you have, like if you start building around, call it your own, solving your own problems with the solution that you think is going to be best, you're still going to have all these problems or take all these things for granted that if an external vendor who sees this problem across all of these different companies and use cases, right? Like that's going to be such a more valuable solution. And then two, we can't forget that like, software companies are much more than just technology and engineering teams, right? There's a lot of other stuff that comes with managing and maintaining products and solutions that are a lot more than just can I hire the people to build it, right? Who's going to train people? Who's going to roll out updates? Who's going to make sure that people are still continuously understanding how to use these things, right? There's just a lot more there.
Well,
I,
before we close, one thing I did want to throw in there. You asked my question about things that the RevOps professionals should also look into using AI. And I'm gonna do a shameless plug for Stephen Diorio, who a buddy of mine, for his course. He talks about, and I do have a slide for this. He talks about this revenue cycle. And I talked about it briefly, the whole ability for you to measure, to do hypothesis and try to understand what the improvement has been. So going from being able to have a theory, put it in practice, measure it, and then learn from it and pivot and do this constantly, right? I think that's a thing that realize people should be doing.
yeah. Well, Jose, thank you, my friend, very much for being here, for dropping some knowledge on the crew today. I really appreciate it. To all the attendees out there, thank you very much for joining as well. But that's all I got for you, so I will let you all run, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you.